back. As you can see in your program, we're going to do a 10-minute talk with the composers and our video artist Lothar Osterburg right now at the beginning of intermission. So if you want to stay and listen, great. If you want to have a 20-minute intermission, you can just disappear. If not, we're going to do a 10-minute talk now and then have another 10-minute break. So I'd like to invite Huang back to the stage. And Elizabeth Brown, our composer and Shakuhachi and theremin player. And Lothar Osterburg. So you can just sit in the quartet chairs, I guess. Sorry. Pardon me? Yeah, that's great. Let's do that. Yeah. Let's go there. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I meant. Just sit anywhere on the stage. Well, exactly. This is very rehearsed. Yeah. Okay, so basically the theme of tonight's program was music which is in some way connected with visual art. And I'd like to first talk a little bit to Huang because this was an interesting example. This piece that we just performed, the Flag Project. It was Momenta Quartet, as inspired by the program director of the Rubin Museum of Art, Tim McHenry, that decided to choose these images for Huang's piece. So Huang just saw these images today at our open rehearsal. And the reason we chose images for the piece was mainly because when you perform at the Rubin Museum, there's always an element of visual art involved, and we already had video art in that program and a projection for one other piece. And Tim McHenry had said it's conventional for performers here to look at the collection. He gave us this incredible private tour of the collection, which, by the way, all of you need to see. I'm endorsing this museum. It's a fabulous museum. So he said originally we should choose some pieces from the Himalayan Buddhist collection to go with this piece because of the Buddhist connections of this piece. But then he said, well, actually, he said Huang's title comes from the title of our exhibit. In 2004, when the Rubin Museum opened, they had an exhibit called the Flag Project, in which they commissioned over 100 artists to make pieces somehow inspired by Buddhism or Himalayan art that were printed on Tibetan prayer flags and hoisted up in the sky, like outside the museum. I wasn't there, I didn't see it. I don't know, were you there, Homer, for that event?
I saw it, and what happened is Tim, we met in New York, and there was one year he has this very beautiful, inspiring thing called the Nine River Gala, and every year they do that. It's named after the nine rivers in Asia. So one year, I think he commissioned me to write a piece for their staircase. So I did a sound installation for their 6-level staircase, resembling the reincarnations of 6 levels. Anyway, so when I was there, I saw this exhibition. I think the time I saw it was some kind of a selection of the exhibition. So it's not the whole thing. I like the title of that, the Flag Project. The piece was not inspired by any of the artwork at all. I just took the title and ran. And then what happened is later on, I was asked to write a string quartet. Then I was thinking, there's so many great string quartets out there, and why me to write another one? Just add more trouble and burdens to the musicians. So unless I have something to say and make it somewhat special. So I always collect Tibetan finger cymbals. I also have singing bowls, all kind of stuff. And one of the habits of mine is to play them when no one is around and just being quiet. So I always thought of them as instruments instead of just percussion instruments making noise. They're part of a very, original instrument. So in this case, it is a string quartet written for string instrument and the cymbals. So they are asked to do both, equally weighted. So that was the journey.
Well, an interesting thing, though, because of course we superimposed this artwork on your piece, and we decided to do it again tonight because we had very positive feedback about it, Rubin. But one thing that I found interesting when you talked to us about the flag project is, regardless of the fact that Momenta Quartet is going to superimpose imagery that has nothing to do with it on your piece.
I like it.
Yeah, good. But I was wondering if there is also a visual element in your imagination of this piece, because you told us that the three movements are based on the different ways in which Tibetan prayer flags move.
Mm.
And of course that can be visual, that can be sonic as well. But there's also the element of these fellows, the way we're moving them in space, the way you're like, is there something about this piece where you're thinking about sound in space and in a kind of painterly way, or in a visual way?
I think the thing about the prayer flag is always outdoor, and it's always part of the nature, and it's being blown by the wind. So when the wind is blowing the flag, it goes different way, depends on where the wind is blowing. So in this case, the sound itself is something we create, but where it goes is out of our control. And different space, different performance created differently. I don't really have very specific visual for each movement, but I still remember when I wrote the third movement, very strongly, I do see there is a string of the prayer flag, which holds all the flags together. When the wind is blowing it, when the wind is very strong, it flips very fast. When the wind is very calm, it just very simply being. And so when the last movement came, you hear this constantly sustained pitch. And that pitch for me is the string. And then you hear different other notes playing around it and being flipping around and bouncing around by all the four musicians. They are the flags being created by the wind in different directions. So that was, in my mind, is something specific. But again, the audience doesn't need to know that or need to think about that yet.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'm going to turn to Elizabeth and Lothar here for a moment. So Elizabeth and Lothar are longtime collaborators in many ways. And I want, the first piece you heard Elizabeth play was your own piece with her playing Shakuhachi, of course, which did not necessarily have a visual element. We just liked to program it.
Well, it's Mirage.
It's Mirage.
So, I suppose we were the Mirage.
Exactly. Or the fact that it was on a program about visual art is a mirage in its own way. But the piece that you're about to enjoy after the intermission, last piece in the program is Piranesi, which actually was, Elizabeth had a Guggenheim Fellowship, and as part of that grant, she decided to write this piece for us and collaborate with Lothar. Lothar made a piece of video art that's inspired by the Italian artist Piranesi. So I want to first ask both of you, what was the seed that generated this project? What gave you the idea to make this musical video tribute to Piranesi?
We had collaborated before, and we discovered, actually, it was when I was writing my Guggenheim proposal, I had this idea. I thought, boy, I really love Piranesi, and I was thinking about theremin and string quartet, and it just seemed like the perfect idea. I don't know how many of you are familiar with his work. Anybody? And Lothar, being a printmaker and actually sharing a birthday with Piranesi, was also a big fan. So it just kind of took off from there. I think you should talk about maybe about the.
Well, yeah, I've known about Piranesi ever since I was an art student in student art school with printmaking. But what fascinated me about the Imaginary Prison series of Piranesi, which this refers to, is that he did two versions of the same set of prints. But he published his first set, his first state, for over 20 years. And back then they just printed as many as they could sell. But after 20 years, he revisited the original plates and changed them drastically, destroying the first state and then printing another whole set. To me, that idea of the artistic goal of being sort of that finite point, which is in fact I find it's not really all that true. It's really an artistic journey of getting to a point, and then after a while you've let it settle, you think, oh, what would happen if I continued working on this and changing it? Of course, when you do painting or so, it's really hard to do that because you're destroying it. But in printmaking, you just have the matrix, the plates, and you've printed your edition, it's done, it's safe. So you can continue working with that. The second thing I'm doing, also I minored in experimental filmmaking, so I revisited video or filmmaking in the form of video art a number of years ago. The same thing you can do in video. You can have alternate edits of the same thing. You can change whole scenes and see how does that whole piece now fit together. So to me, this piece was the kind of an artistic journey with an overarching kind of goal in mind without having a script. So when I started the video, I just started working and let things happen as they happen. So in the video you will see basically the artistic process developing and kind of derailing and meandering.
Is there something about, I think there's something about Piranesi that also inspired the theorem, is this element of the surreal in his art as well?
Yeah, Piranesi he was both an architect and an artist printmaker, but he only, I think, had one job as an architect. He was really a frustrated architect, and in his images, he drew these elaborate, impossible architectural structures. And the theremin is, well, you know, kind of a wacky, out there sound. But on the other hand, Piranesi was doing these crazy images, but using this old technique, and he was just so good at it. So I was thinking about, wow, you know, the string quartet, it's been around forever, it really works, it represents all these layers of history. And the other thing is that one of the things that, another subject that Piranesi did prints of, in addition to the imaginary prisons, which Lothar refers to, he did all these scenes of Rome of the day, and a lot of them showed the ruins of Rome. This was in the 1800s, 1700s. But people were already living in the ruins. I mean, they were constantly being recreated. And Lothar, actually, you'll see he built something, and then he totally, you're going to see the second state where he totally inhabits his ruin. But to me, the combination of the theremin and the string quartet, the theremin it will blend with the string quartet, but it makes it a little odd.
One of the most famous kind of students or artists who were inspired by Piranesi is M.C. Escher with his impossible endless staircase. And Piranesi has a lot of these impossible perspectives in his imaginary prisons. So I think that's, we kind of refer to that as well, like these wacky, weird, impossible spaces. But inspired by the old Roman ruins and re-inspired, reimagining how they may have been.
Reimagined in industrial Brooklyn.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm taking it, of course, a few centuries beyond Piranesi, yes.
It was another type of urban ruin of its
Right.
kind, which is now being inhabited and gentrified.
It's a constant flux, just
Yes.
like the old Roman ruins have been
Yes.
for a few thousand years.
Well, I think we should probably take an intermission unless anyone here has some questions for our two composers or Lothar. Does anyone have any?
Did Piranesi ever give any explanation why he went back and so radically altered those?
I've read two kind of, I don't think how scientific these accounts are. One I've heard was possibly some publishing rights, that maybe someone else had sort of the rights to publish the first set, but by changing it significantly, he would then own the publishing rights. That's more the pragmatic.
Right.
I like to think that he was just getting, after 20 years printing the same plate, I think you would get a little bored by it, or even if you had great images, wanting to see some change. So I prefer to think of it that way.
Okay.
But I can freely interpret it the way I want.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, so it seems like you had an initial kind of broad, overall idea for the piece inspired by Piranesi, and I'm wondering, do you think more in terms of sort of specific or more localized, like, you know, this musical idea comes right out of this specific part of Piranesi etching or something like that? Something like the string and flags in Huang's piece.
Well, this one of the difficulties in this particular collaboration was that Lothar couldn't hear the music until I had written it, because I had to, you know, write it down and get people to play it and record it so he could then go. So, you know, there were a few versions like that. He had talked about a structure, and I wrote the piece sort of with his structure in mind, but then when he got the music, his whole idea of what he was going to do opened up. Like the names of my movements don't correspond, but they gave him an idea. I think that he actually makes a plate and prints it in the video, which he hadn't planned to do before at all. So it became completely about the artistic process. So, and this has happened in our other collaborations too. You plan, but you don't really know what's going to happen, and you do your best with the ideas you have, and hopefully you'll get even better ideas.
I think when I'm responding visually to Elizabeth's music, which was in fact done before I finished the video, is on an emotional level. And I'm also a retired musician, so I kind of have probably a little bit more in than the average visual artist. I don't know. I don't want to assume anything, sorry. But yes.
Is it very difficult to play those little finger bells, cymbals?
Well, you know,
with
it's
a bow?
interesting because we are trained for years and years and years to play these instruments.
Yeah.
And I can't really speak for my colleagues, but I can actually barely do anything else other than play viola when it comes to coordination. So for me, these are like incredibly difficult because I haven't been playing it for like 20, 30 years, like I have been playing the viola. But probably, I don't know, what do you think, Huang? Are these difficult to play?
I think it's not difficult to hit it. Everyone could do that.
Intonation is easy.
But I think the first movement I require them to move around, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the speed of, you know, you want to move not too fast, but slow enough so that you could hear the sound traveling. So that's one difficulty. Another difficulty is bowing.
The bowing is actually really inconsistent.
Yeah.
It's sort of a Zen thing, you know, like.
You can't push too hard, and you can't push too soft either. So it's just the right spot. Then it sings out if you do it
Yeah.
right.
It's beautiful. Has that ever been done before?
I think bowing cymbal is not something new.
Percussionists do it a lot.
Yeah,
I've actually
they
loaned
do.
bows to percussionists. I think what's interesting though, because the piece is based on this sort of Buddhist philosophy and stuff, and there's a sort of element of impermanence about these. Like you're not 100% sure what's going to come
Yeah.
out. You know, that was a really good one, but that's because I wasn't thinking about it. Whereas when you're in performance and, you know, if yours doesn't come out and there's going to be a big hole in the texture, then it's kind of stressful.
And I mean, but I never heard 4 Tibetan cymbals bow together. I mean, I never experienced it. I don't know what other piece done that. Also, when I first wrote this movement, the second movement, I think I put the notes I put down is maybe for 30 seconds. And then later on, when I listened to it, I was like, you know what, I really enjoy that. I don't want the cello coming too soon. And then I make it 1 minute or whatever. So I believe in if something, in order for people to really feel it, at first they might think this is just noise, you know, go away, go away. But when it didn't go away, you are forced to really have to listen to it. And then you become part of your surrounding, right? Then you start understanding it. So for me, that length actually is good, so that we could really know this is purpose, is on purpose.
It's interesting how long the vibration lasts.
Yes, yes. So this is not a regular, you know, choir bell, that kind of thing. It's made of 7 metals. So basically, they mix the metals together and then they rebuild it. So it's quite heavy. And when you hear it, the sound lasts for a longer time because of that also. Any other questions or thoughts before we?
Well, I think we should take a little intermission, we'll reset, so maybe we'll start in another 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.